Went a little bit over, 10 minutes, and boom, didn't load. Chapter 53, Part 1. Probably 2 parts. On Monday, Jim, Gunny, and Mark went to town to train those who were training their own small groups. Mark found a few minutes to talk with Kurt. The sheriff said he hadn't heard anything from FEMA yet. He was a little surprised they hadn't been to see him, and he told Mark he'd be sure to keep everyone up to date when they did show up. On Tuesday, Gunny spent the morning with Mark's scout team. In the afternoon, he sent them on a short recon mission. Gunny divided them in 2 fire teams. Mark and Susan would be the leader of each team. Susan was assigned Jess and Olga, while Mark was given Letty and Chris. Everyone was carrying AR-15s except for Mark, who had his FAL, and Olga, who had the Frankenfoul Jerry had sold to Mark. This gave each fire team a heavy battle rifle to go with the poodle shooters. That's what Gunny called the ARs. Gunny also gave everyone a chest rig for their magazines. "Where did you get these?" Mark asked, noticing they were made from heavy canvas. "Rob lent me his, and Abby used it for a pattern to make some for us. They don't have the Velcro or nice buckles like the original, but I think she did a great job on them." "I'll say," Mark said. Mark smiled as he put his on. The rig had pockets for magazines in the front, and the straps spread the weight across his shoulders so that it was quite comfortable. Mark had thought several times that they needed a better way to carry their extra mags. He gave Gunny a grin and a thumbs up. The only other gear anyone carried was a canteen and a handgun. Mark and Susan also had FRS radios. They circled the subdivision, trying to stay about a half-mile away from their home base. There were no residences within that distance. Everyone did well, except for a few times when they had to be reminded not to bunch up. As far as his team went, there were no surprises. They didn't see anyone during their trek, but 2 things did intrigue Mark about the ground they covered. The first was a cut fence to the northeast of the subdivision. It was fresh, and there were still footprints where a small group had gone through. The second was the utility easement running south of their homes, just on the edge of the half-mile circle. It was over the hill and hidden by the trees behind Silver Hills. Mark had no idea that a natural gas pipeline ran that close to his house. The real surprise was how a path had been worn down through the easement. He and his team followed it a ways, and they found evidence of 2 recent camps and several other signs humans were using the pipeline to escape from the city. It made sense to Mark once he thought about it. The easement was mowed, and it had gates in each fence it crossed. It was a lot easier to climb a gate than it was a barbed wire fence. Plus, people didn't like to build their houses too close to the pipeline, so the chances of running into property owners were slim. Mark imagined that the people using the easement were ones who didn't want any trouble, and it was probably a lot safer than walking down the road. They'd have to keep an eye on this. If MZBs started using it, there could be big trouble. Fortunately, MZBs were usually lazy and not that smart. When they got back to the subdivision, the team was debriefed by Gunny. He told Mark about his ideas how to watch the easement, and that they would talk with the security team committee after they found out a little more. That night after the meeting, Roberta Simmons came up to Mark and apologized to him for what she'd said when Scott died. Mark told her it was understandable, and he accepted her apology. She told him she wanted to help out any way she could. Mark made a suggestion that she check with Jess and Lisa to see how she could best contribute. Mark also expressed his sincere grief about Scott's death. The next night at dinner, Mark got 2 surprises. The first was Alex Petrie joining them for the meal. The second was a small bowl of radishes on the table. "Are these out of our garden?" he asked. "Yes, they are," Jess beamed. Mark wasn't crazy about radishes, but these were delicious, probably because he hadn't had any fresh produce in over a month. He noticed that Alex was quite reserved. In fact, he never looked directly at Mark during the entire meal. Mark thought he probably had his bluff in on the teen youngster. He hoped so. After dinner, there was an impromptu domino tournament. Everyone partnered up with his or her significant other. When Mark and Jess played Sam and Alex, Mark was impressed by the boys' adroitness for the game. Mark had to pull his A game out to beat the young team. If he and Jess hadn't been playing together for so long that each knew what the other partner was thinking, the outcome might well have been different. When Mark went to bed, his thoughts were mostly about his family. It had now been 20 days since they'd left Waco. His hopes that they would make it here were diminishing. Now he prayed they were safe wherever they were. Thursday morning, Mark's team reported to Gunny for training. He ran them through some quick drills and informed them what he wanted them to do for the remainder of the day. They were to make their way east along the easement cautiously and see if they could determine where the people using it were coming from. The refugee traffic had started picking up again since the order to report to shelters. They were seeing 8 or 10 groups a day making their way past the gate. Some of these groups had a place to go, but others didn't. Gunny wanted to know how many people were using the pipeline and where they were entering it. Once Mark's team reported back on the entrance or entrances to the pipeline, he planned to send Jim's team out on a 2 or 3 day patrol to determine how much it was being used. Then they could decide on the proper precautions. When Susan heard that the other team was going on the first overnight patrol, she started to protest. "We're the first team up," she argued. "We should get the overnight patrol." Mark saw the irritation on Gunny's face. He started to say something to his second-in-command, but before he could, Jess spoke up. "Would you gentlemen please excuse us for a minute?" The other 4 women pulled Susan with them just out of earshot of the 2 men. They watched the animated conversation, wondering what was being said. Jess and Olga did most of the talking at first. It wasn't hard to see that Susan didn't like what they were telling her. Her responses were punctuated by her arms moving as much as her mouth was. After a few minutes, the 5 women came back over. Nothing was said, and Susan just stood there with her arms folded and a sour look on her face.